Hello folks, it's the Page Chaser again. Welcome to another video. This is the story of a number of bus companies, mainly in the Hull area of East Yorkshire, but also taken in Lincolnshire, West Yorkshire, South Yorkshire, Accrington and various other places as well. We're going to mention almost 30 different bus companies. We've got pictures of most of them and it's all a bit mad, to be honest. It's just a weird idea I've had. It's quite a simple story, but we're going to embellish it and make it a bit more than it actually was. So it's entitled From Pilgrimage to Ice Cream. It's not intended to be a full history of the companies featured, although some operators are covered in quite some detail. So let's get started. Our story begins in around 1975 in Hull, East Yorkshire, when Philip and Raymond Hunter set up a coach company called Good News Travels, which I have to admit is a great name. As well as doing conventional coach hire, particularly to church groups, Sunday schools, etc., they also began to run overland tours to sites of religious interest, such as the Holy Land, and also to Lourdes in southwest France, seen here in a picture by Manu4U2 and shared under Wikimedia Commons License 2.0. Amongst other vehicles, some Bristol FLF low deckers were kept for this work, and these were fitted with bunks and kitchen equipment. So, we've done the pilgrimage, let's get on to ice cream. In 1982, the first large supermarket in the Hull area opened in the form of the Asda store at Bilton, just to the east of Hull. Good News began running free bus services to and from the store from various parts of Hull, and then following deregulation in 1986 they began to operate some contracted services on behalf of Humberside County Council. Contracts tended to be renewed quite regularly in those days, and Good News soon lost the contracted services to Kingston upon Hull City Transport, or KHCT for short, and to East Yorkshire. However, they did retain some school contracts and the Asda free bus, to which they also added another free supermarket bus to the recently constructed Tesco store at Orchard Park. In 1988 they began to run competitive services mainly against KHCT, but also to Wold Road and Long Hill in competition with East Yorkshire. During that year, the company began to use the name Humber Stagecoach for its bus operations, as modelled here on an ex-Reading Jumbo Bristol VR with Northern Counties bodywork. Now I know what you're thinking, Pacer Chaser, surely such a name aroused the interest of a certain Scottish gentleman. Well, it would seem not, at least not at this stage. Stagecoach were just starting out on their road to ubiquity, and many industry managers were confidently predicting that they won't last. Ironically, many of those managers will find themselves working for Stagecoach in the years to come. But even if Brian Souter was aware of this small operation in Hull, it doesn't appear to have bothered him yet. However, although Stagecoach weren't bothered, KHCT did raise a complaint to the Office of Fair Trading regarding Humber Stagecoach's livery. KHCT used blue and white as seen here on Dennis Dominator 157, whilst Humber Stagecoach, in stark contrast, used, blue and white. There was some wishy-washy agreement regarding altering the proportions of the livery, which probably explains the scheme on this VR, but many vehicles were not treated. In any case, KHCT were just beginning to face other problems, which would eventually lead to the company being sold. Amongst these was the presence of a villa in France on the company books and a massive unpaid tax bill. In April 1990, Humber Stagecoach went into partnership with Metro Citybus to launch a joint offensive on Route 10 between Hull City Centre and Bransholme North. Both operators had been running on the route in competition with KHCT, who had unleashed their CityLink subsidiary onto the route in answer. CityLink were a low-cost subsidiary of KHCT and used a three-tone green livery, as seen here on fleet number C1 WRH281J, formerly 281 in the main fleet. It had its origins in an independent operator whom KHCT had acquired in March 1989. That independent was David Costa Buses, trading as CityLink. David Costa had been the proprietor of a toy shop in the Greatfield estate in East Hull. However, he held a long-standing ambition to run a bus company, which he realised in January 1988 when he started CityLink. By the time of the KHCT takeover, David Costa was running 4 vehicles: a Volkswagen LT55 mini coach with Optare City Pacer bodywork, which KHCT kept and placed in their Kingstonian coach fleet, an ex-South Yorkshire PTE via Ribble Daimler Fleet Line, which was sold for scrap, and 2 AEC Routemasters which were withdrawn and stored at Cottingham Road Garage before eventual sale to East Yorkshire in July of 1989. 741 DYE, seen here in East Yorkshire ownership as their fleet number 809, was formerly London Transport RM 1741, new in 1963, and was one of only two vehicles in the CityLink fleet to carry their livery, the other being the City Pacer. The CityLink name was retained by KHCT to form a low-cost unit, as already related, and David Costa found employment with the new owners. Anyway, Humber Stagecoach and Metro combined to launch a joint attack against KHCT and CityLink on the 10, running every 10 minutes. If memory serves, I believe they accepted each other's return tickets, and there was possibly a weekly you could buy that was valid on either Metro or Humber Stagecoach. I'd love to show you the route branding, but I've been unable to locate a photo that I can use without breaching copyright. Basically, if you imagine any of either Humber Stagecoach or Metro buses as pictured so far, with a small yellow sticker underneath the windscreen and occasionally on the sides as well, with red lettering on that sticker reading Rhubarb and Custard Route 10, Hull, Brandsome, Hull, then you're there. Rhubarb and Custard was an odd marketing term to use given that Humber Stagecoach's livery was blue and white as already discussed, whereas Metro City Bus, as you can see, bucked the trend by painting their buses, blue and white. Metro had been formed by Jim Houghton, a well-known figure in the Hull bus scene, who had been running a taxi and minibus company with a garage that was open to the public to bring the cars for MOT, repair, etc. In June 1989 it expanded into local bus services before tying up with Humber Stagecoach, as already mentioned, in April of 1990. The fleet mainly comprised of Leyland Nationals, but there were other types as well. As we have seen, copyright issues again mean I can't show you the Nationals, but they included the Atlanteans that we've already seen in the picture, and this ex-United Counties Bristol VR, registered SRP 818N, seen in 1989 in Short Street, Hull, on a long-forgotten challenge to East Yorkshire on route 277 to Heddon. Not long after this photo was taken by a young and inexperienced pacer chaser, SRP had its front painted blue and white, whilst the rest received an advertisement for Pilcher Homes. There's a video on YouTube of a local news report from about 1990 where a film crew ride on a Metro Atlantean on Route 10, and there's a first-hand report on the competition from KHCT and an interview with Jim Houghton. If I can find it, I'll put it in a link in the description to this video. The Hull area did not attract much attention from non-local enthusiasts, so it's not always possible to pinpoint exact dates for events, as you'll see later on in this video. As such, it's not clear when the Rhubarb and Custard partnership broke up, but if I recall correctly, it was sometime in mid to late 1991. Metro sold its services and vehicles, which operated them to East Yorkshire in 1992. And we illustrate East Yorkshire with an ex-Northern General Leyland Atlantean with Eastern Coachworks body fleet number 909, registered MPT 309P, seen laying over in Beverley Bus Station. The photo we've been looking at of the Metro Atlanteans PAT 951M and PAT 947M, both new to East Yorkshire, is taken after the takeover, as they're standing on the parking area behind Hull Bus Station known as the Muck. When Metro were still independent, they weren't allowed onto that parking area, they had to use the streets next door to it, as we saw with SRP 818N earlier on. So the fact that they are standing on the Muck in among the East Yorkshire vehicles means it's after they were taken over by East Yorkshire. And so for the first time in this video, let's go off on a tangent. And the first tangent is, what did Jim Houghton do next? The sale of Metro to East Yorkshire contained a clause forbidding Jim from setting up in competition with East Yorkshire for a certain number of years, 3 if I remember correctly. He went back to the taxi, minibus, garage business. I think he also sold vehicles as well, and didn't re-emerge into local bus operation until early 2000 or late 1999, somewhere around there, when City Central burst onto the scene. The bright, attractive livery and bold fleet name are modelled here by one-time National Well subsidiary red and white Leyland National NWO 460R. Around this time there was quite a bit of revivalism going on in the bus industry. A typical example took place in Accrington, where both Pilkingtons and M&T Coaches painted some of their vehicles into the old Accrington Corporation and later Hindburn red and blue livery, as evidenced here by Pilkington's ex-Lothian Atlantean PIL 9536 looking rather resplendent in their depot. Just for reference, that's what their normal livery looked like, the red and cream. And that was M&M's normal livery, just all over red. Just up the road from Accrington was Blackburn, where the Bailey Group's Catchbus operation had registered a new trading name which caused some ructions in the local area. The main operator in Blackburn was Blackburn Transport, which was the trading name of Blackburn Transport Limited. But it was found that although they'd registered Blackburn Transport as a trading name, they hadn't registered Blackburn Transport Limited, so the Bailey Group did just that, and proceeded to stick the name Blackburn Transport Limited onto the side of their red-painted minibuses. Blackburn Transport, the real one, were not impressed, but it didn't matter in the long run because the Bailey Group ceased trading amid allegations of fraud and unpaid wages. They did, however, pass the idea on to other people, and Jim Houghton did a bit of research. Now, prior to World War II, Hull Corporation buses had displayed a large Hull name in the middle of the side, as you can see on this Dennis Dominator in a heritage livery. And then they had a smaller Corporation Transport underneath. When the Second World War broke out, the hull was removed as part of the plan to confuse the enemy, which also saw road signs removed across the country. The idea was that if the enemy invaded, they would become disorientated, and whilst they were trying to find out where they were, the British could rally and fight them off. In Hull it was probably academic because the East Yorkshire buses were still running around with East Yorkshire stuck to the side, and you would imagine that the Germans had done enough research to know that if they were in East Yorkshire and looking at a large city, then that city was probably Hull. But anyway, it was worth a try. The thing was that the word Hull was never reapplied to the buses after the war ended, and up until 1972 the buses just carried Corporation Transport as a fleet name, as you can see on this preserved Leyland Atlantean fleet number 270, registered TKH 270H. So Jim Houghton looked into it, found that the Corporation Transport phrase had never actually been registered, so he registered it, and he proceeded to paint some of the City Central vehicles into the streamlined livery that you can see here, the blue and white with the streamlined flashing down the side, and display the Corporation Transport name. Now again, thanks to the vagaries of trying to find photos that I can actually use, I can't show you any of the vehicles that he repainted, which were mainly Greater Manchester Standard Atlanteans and Leyland Nationals of various sorts. But he did own at the same time this Leyland Panther, formerly Hull number 180, GAT 180D, which carried the livery because that's the livery it carried when it was in service. And this bus did actually go out into service on the City Central and Corporation Transport routes every now and again, did the odd turn up and down to Branzome, where apparently it went down a storm with the older passengers. The issue was that by this time the local bus services in Hull, the ex-KHCT operation, had been taken over by Stagecoach, and they'd introduced their Day Rider and Mega Rider tickets, which offered a cheap way to travel around the city. It also locked passengers into the Stagecoach buses. They couldn't use them on other operators. It turned out that and the fact that Stagecoach were then operating more and more low-floor buses, which of course are essential to wheelchair users but also popular with mothers with pushchairs in a way that step entry Atlanteans and Nationals aren't, and that tilted the balance very much in Stagecoach's favour. So the City Central and Corporation Transport operation didn't really work out, and Jim Houghton decided to wind it up. The better vehicles were kept and used to form a new operation, Ellie Rose, named after Jim's granddaughter. You could hire a coach from Ellie Rose, but the main sphere of operation was, and still is, school bus services. At the time of recording in 2025, Ellie Rose is still very much in business, although sadly Jim Houghton passed away in 2012, leaving his widow Sheila and son Shane to run the company. Incidentally, his granddaughter Ellie Rose, who it was named after, passed a PCV test in 2018 and went to work for the company, which is quite fitting. In 2006, Ellie Rose purchased the business of You Can Go Southcoats in Hull. There's no copyright issues on that one, I've just never heard of them and never photographed them either. And they also purchased Ben Johnson Coaches of Brands Burton, whose DJA 560T is seen here in Bridlington Bus Station in April of 1997. Anyway, let's get back onto the subject, and to do so we need to consider an operator called Pride of the Road. Pride of the Road was formed in Royston near Barnsley in 1981 when Fred Platts and Bill Taylor bought the Royston depot of the legendary Leeds-based coach operator Wallace Arnold. For the first few years, the contracts acquired with the sale formed the workload of the company, along with private hires and excursions. But at deregulation in 1986, local services were introduced around Barnsley and in due course from Barnsley to Wakefield. Incidentally, the Pride of the Road moniker had been used by Fred Platt's grandmother, who ran buses in the 1920s prior to the introduction of road service licensing, and hence it was decided to reuse the name. Pride of the Road became something of a whack-a-mole operator, and you never knew where they were going to pop up next. A number of services were started in Huddersfield, where the normal diet of second-hand Leyland Nationals was briefly joined by this ex-Mayfair Tidville, Wadham stringer-bodied Dennis Lancet. One or two routes were also begun in Leeds, and in 1989 and 90 the company expanded into Bradford, initially on the shop hopper service around the city centre. Whilst operating in Bradford, Pride of the Road single-handedly killed off the proposal to reintroduce trolleybuses to West Yorkshire. West Yorkshire PTE had received the promise of funding from the government to enable it to construct a trolleybus route between Bradford city centre and the Buttershaw estate. They got as far as appointing Yorkshire Rider as its operator, not least because Rider had threatened to compete against the trolleybuses if they weren't awarded the contract. They were beginning to look for contractors to build the trolleybus route, put the wires up and things like that, when Pride of the Road registered their intention to start a bus service along the proposed route between Bradford and Buttershaw. In order to be able to pay back the capital costs of the scheme, the trolleybus operator required a monopoly on the route, and any abstraction of revenue would affect the viability of the project. The PTE belatedly realised this, and realised that a monopoly could not be guaranteed under deregulation. And the Pride of the Road registration was the thing that made them realise that, so the trolleybus scheme was scrapped. In later years, legislation has been brought in to protect fixed infrastructure transport schemes such as trams and trolleybuses from competition, so that any proposed rival bus services can be refused. But this was not the case in 1990, and indeed any such refusal back then would have been illegal. Ironically, after all that, the Pride of the Road service was not a success and was soon withdrawn. By the way, I did a video about the trolleybus proposals in the 1980s that were made in both West Yorkshire and South Yorkshire. Again, I'll put a link to that in the description if you want to watch it. Just a quick one as well, this bus isn't in Bradford or indeed in West Yorkshire, it's in Barnsley, EFN 170L. But it does carry advertising for Sky Pride Travel, which was the kind of excursions and tours booking arm of Pride of the Road. So Pride of the Road withdrew from Bradford, but in 1992 they suddenly appeared in Hull, without much prior notice, to be fair. They ran in competition with both KHCT and East Yorkshire, and here we see a rather scruffy ex-Ribble national PTF 761L about to set sail for the Orchard Park estate on Route 5B. In 1993, Pride of the Road bought the Humber Stagecoach operations from Good News Travels, allowing the latter to return to purely coaching activities. Good News continued to trade until around 2008, albeit in new ownership, after Philip and Raymond Hunter retired. The company remained dormant until 2021 when it was voluntarily struck off the register of Companies House. By 1993, Stagecoach had noticed a small operator in Hull, and I believe a word was had. The Humber Stagecoach fleet had consisted solely of Leyland Nationals since around 1991, and most of them were running without fleet names anyway, but the handful that still sported a name had it removed, although a couple did still carry the Coach and Horses logo that we saw on the Bristol VR earlier on, but that was sufficiently different to anything that Stagecoach used not to cause a problem. The anonymous blue and white Nationals continued to work for Pride of the Road and were not repainted. The numbers dwindled and the last one vanished in around early 1996. As they used to say on Monty Python, and now for something completely different. K-Line Travel were formed in the early 1980s in Huddersfield. After the whole private hire and contract thing, they were another firm to introduce local services around the time of deregulation in 1986. The cream and green livery, sometimes with red or orange stripes on top of it, adorned various types of vehicle, including Leyland Leopards and MCW Metro riders, but by the early to mid-90s they were using mainly Leyland Nationals in a blue and white livery. as you can see on this vehicle, DOC 28V, operating in Leeds. In 1994, K-Line acquired Taylor's Coaches of Morley, who ran a fleet of second-hand double-deckers, usually in an all-red livery. Bristol VRs, Leyland Atlanteans and Volvo Ilses featured, along with ex-Thames down Daimler Fleetline NHR 163M, seen sporting an unusual red and cream livery in central Morley with a Black Prince ex-London Leyland National behind. And now it's time for another tangent. Taylor's had its origins in M&T Coaches, M&T being Muffet and Taylor, a partnership between Dennis Muffet and David Taylor begun in March 1985. Once again, a period of private hires and contracts was followed by service work after deregulation, illustrated by one-time Eastern Counties Bristol RE TVF 705G, seen departing Leeds Con Exchange for Morley in 1988. In January 1989, the partnership was dissolved. David Taylor immediately formed Taylor's Coaches, who we've already seen, and Dennis Muffet took a 6-month sabbatical, but returned in July 1989 with Miramar Coaches. Now, I can almost hear you shouting at your screens now. Pacer Chaser, surely that's pronounced Miramar or Myramare or something like that. Well, it's not. I met Dennis Muffet in the early 2000s because my now ex, the first Mrs. Pacer Chaser, was a friend of his daughter. Apologies for that. But as you would imagine, we spoke about buses and he pronounced it as Miramar. So I'm going to go with his pronunciation because obviously he owned the company. Normally delivery, by the way, was blue and grey, but this bus is still in its acquired livery. It's an ex-United Leyland National VPT 949R and it's still in United's red and white livery. Miramar ceased operating around late 1995 when Dennis decided to retire, and indeed he was happily retired when I met him, although I believe he's since passed away, sadly. Anyway, back to the story. So K-Line took over Taylor's and replaced the double-deckers with a mixture of new DAFs and second-hand Leyland Nationals in the K-Line blue and white livery, typical of which was ex-West Midlands DOC 52V, seen in Vicar Lane, Leeds on its way to Motown. I should mention for completeness as well, it's not really relevant to us really, but K-Line had another offshoot which was the Headlight Bus Company. They mainly ran around Barnsley, but you could also find their buses in Rotherham, and as you can see here in Doncaster, this view taken in Doncaster South bus station, with a fine backdrop of a Yorkshire traction Scania and a mainline Volvo just off to the left there. And back to the story again. In 1994 or 1995, Proud of the Road had modernised their Hull fleet with some new DAFs, mainly with Icarus city bus bodies. However, during 1995 they sold out to K-Line. The new owners soon decided that the Hull operation was too far from the rest of the operations in West and South Yorkshire and sold it to its local managements. As part of the deal, the DAFs were retained by K-Line and went off to Huddersfield and Leeds, and they were replaced by an eclectic mix of Leyland Nationals plus a couple of one-time West Yorkshire Roadcar Leyland Leopards. The Hull operation was relaunched as North Bank Travel, initially in a purple and cream livery but soon changed to blue and cream, as you can see on this bus. The fleet name had a rather clever styling feature whereby the H was made to look like one of the piers of the Humber Bridge. And you can see it on the front of new to Halton ACW 920R, pulled up outside a sandwich van near Hull Station between trips on the 7D to Mizzen Road. So we're not far off the end of the story now. We've got one more operator to consider in detail, another one to have a bit of a briefer look at. But first of all, how do you fancy another tangent? Yeah, there we go. Why not? Not at all relevant, but interesting nonetheless, is a story involving K-Line after they'd sold the Pride of the Road operation. In the mid-1990s, Yorkshire Rider had been acquired by Badgerline Holdings, and following the merger of Badgerline with GRT, had become part of First Bus. Shortly after, the different areas were given new names, so Yorkshire Rider Leeds became Leeds CityLink, Yorkshire Rider Bradford became Bradford Traveller, etc, etc. The exception was Yorkshire Rider Wakefield, which was subsumed into Leeds CityLink. In 1997, First closed the Wakefield garage, which was actually at Kinsley between Fitzwilliam and Hemsworth, without replacements. Luckily, Arriva stepped in to fill the breach. and they provided replacement cover on the service that had been given up, the 498 between Wakefield and Doncaster. At around the same time, Arriva decided it didn't want to run the 223 and 224 between Leeds and Halifax via Accrington anymore, and the service was passed on to Leeds CityLink, part of First. A bit random, but so far so good. But then in 2000, Arriva, there they are again, purchased Taylor's from Amvale, the holding company for the K-Line Group. It was initially reported that they bought the entire group, but they hadn't. They just bought the Taylor's operation in Leeds and also the couple of services that had been operated under the K-Line name from Leeds to Overton. The Overton ones were incorporated into the main Arriva operation out of Belle Isle Depot at Wakefield. But the Taylor's fleet, which consisted by that stage of Leyland National 2s and more modern DAFs, gained Arriva fleet names in the windows. The DAFs got Arriva livery. Eventually, an Leeds area day ticket was introduced. However, 6 months after the takeover, the operation was declared not viable and was closed down, leaving First with a monopoly in the Headingley and Hull Park areas in North Leeds, and with less competition in other areas such as Moortown and Morley. Meanwhile, First had decided they didn't want to run the 223 and 224 Leeds to Halifax via Accrington, etc., anymore, and passed them back to Arriva. In the meantime, across in Huddersfield, First Huddersfield introduced some service changes, which meant that the K-Line services in various parts of the town no longer had any competition from First on them, giving K-Line parts of the town, particularly around Newsham, to themselves. A rat was eventually smelled, and investigations found out that First, Arriva and K-Line had held secret meetings in hotels whereat they'd made agreements to reduce competition to everybody's mutual advantage. Fines were issued and words of rebuke spoken, but it was all academic as it had already happened. Anyway, back to our story. In 1913, William Appleby, the proprietor of the village shop in Conisholme, North East Lincolnshire, began running a carrier's service conveying goods and passengers into Louth, what would today be termed a side hustle. By 1955, 6 buses were being operated on local routes. Over the next 25 years, other local operators were purchased. Walmsley Brothers of North Somercotes in 1955, Adams of Saltfleet in 1962, A.E. Brown of Caister in 1967, Hudson's of Horncastle in 1974, and Parker of Washingborough near Lincoln in 1977. 1982 saw the company expand across the River Humber when the Hull depot of Bodies of Bridlington was purchased, and the Bridlington base and the rest of the Bodies operation came into Appleby's ownership a year later in 1983. By this point, the local routes have been joined by coach hire, excursions, tours and holidays, and all of these facets continued until the company ceased trading, of which more later on. Following deregulation, Applebys expanded, opening a base in Scarborough from which local services and open-top runs along the seafront were operated. The latter competed with Scarborough and District, which are part of East Yorkshire, Shoreline Sun Cruisers and a myriad of other operators that came and went, and among Applebys' contribution was a rather nice ex-Plymouth open-top Atlantean, WJY 760, seen in this photo here. Applebys continued to expand and in the mid-1990s purchased Halcyon Coaches of Hull. Halcyon specialised in holidays, particularly to continental Europe. The Halcyon base in Wyncombe Lee in Hull was used to facilitate a massive expansion of school contract operations during 1997. As you can see here in this view, with a high-spec Halcyon coach, sharing a depot space with an Applebys Plaxton Paramount coach, an Alexander Y-type service bus and a selection of school Atlanteans, formerly with Stagecoach Manchester and Liverline and still in their liveries. Also in 1997, Applebys expanded its presence in the Lincoln area with the purchase of Enterprise and Silver Dawn of Waddington. Set up by preservationist Michael Gallagher in 1978, Enterprise and Silver Dawn used the name of an independent which had been bought by Lincolnshire Roadcar in 1950, but unlike Pride of the Road there was no family link. Various services were run over the years, including a service to Hull from Lincoln, operated with vehicles which included ex-London Scania Metropolitans, and I would love to have gone on one of those. I love Metropolitans, but unfortunately I was too young, so I never did. By the time of the Applebys takeover, the main Lincoln to Waddington service had been joined by seasonal links to Skegness and routes around the latter town. Applebys undertook some fleet modernisation, mainly with leased vehicles, and they also updated its livery to look more modern, as seen here on the Leyland National leaving Lincoln for Boston, registered LGI 8027. The relevance of Applebys to our story is that in 1998 they acquired North Bank Travel and once again introduced a modified livery, or modernised livery should I say, as seen on PUK 624R, which had been new to Midland Red. The number 11 that you can see in a circle on the emergency door towards the rear of the bus is not route branding, it's actually the bus's fleet number, and I think that caused a bit of confusion to passengers over the years that they worked, because the buses carried random seeming numbers on the sides. Unfortunately, a combination of a large operating area of relatively thin service coverage, an ageing fleet, the leasing costs of the newer vehicles, too many acquisitions and competition meant Applebys ran into financial trouble, and they entered administration in 2000 and soon ceased trading. There were hopes that the North Bank operation might be sold on and sold out of administration, but it wasn't to be, and that ceased operations as well. Because some of the Hull network covered roads not served by the other operators in the city, some of the services went out to tender from the council and became operated by Amvale in due course. Now, I've already covered Amvale in a separate video, and once again I'll put a link in the description to this one, to that if you want to watch it. And so we come to the end of the story. Essentially, Humber Stagecoach was bought by Pride of the Road, which morphed into North Bank and was taken over by Applebys, and that would have been a very short and straightforward video, but where's the fun in that? I thought it'd be far more entertaining to drag in more or less every operator in the north of England and the East Midlands, and why not? Just to finish the Applebys story, the name was purchased from the administrators by Bowens of Northamptonshire, I believe they were, but they ceased trading as well in 2012, at which point the name was bought again, this time by Lincolnshire operator Radley Coaches of Brigg, and they continue to use it on some of their vehicles to this very day. I'm doing this in August 2025, and you can still find some of their buses running around with Applebys names on, complete with a modified version of the Applebys livery, basically cream with red and green flashes on it, which is very, very nice to see. But hang on, Pacer Chaser, where is the ice cream that you promised? Well, back in 1913, the carrier service wasn't William Applebys' only side hustle. He also started making ice cream, at first mixed by hand in a bucket, and he went on to open an ice cream parlour, which is still trading today. It passed through various generations of the Applebys family, but was eventually sold out of family ownership, and it's changed hands a few times, and as I'm doing this in August 2025, it's up for sale again if you fancy running an ice cream parlour. It's lovely ice cream, it's well worth a visit if you're passing through Connie's home on the road from Grimsby towards Mablethorpe, and it still trades from these premises, which are next door to the former bus garage. Sadly, there's no sign of the latter's use remaining. I'll have a look when I visited the ice cream parlour, and although the buildings still stand, they've been repurposed and modernised, and you can't see any relics, unfortunately, of the old Applebys coach operation, but the ice cream is still very much well worth a visit, and plus there's a cafe there as well doing hot and cold drinks and cakes and things like that if you don't fancy ice cream. This video is another one shared under Wikimedia Commons. I can't recall or find the original photographer, but it's shared under the Wikimedia Commons license 2.0. So this is probably the silliest video I've attempted today. I hope you've enjoyed watching it. I certainly enjoyed writing the script and finding the photographs to do it. So if you have enjoyed it, please hit the like button, just so I know I've not quite wasted my time. Thank you to the photographers, most of whom I don't know. These photos are just from my collection. I don't know the original photographers, but copyright remains with them. Some of them were taken by me, some by my late father, and the ones I've mentioned were shared under Wikimedia Commons license 2.0. But that's it for now. As always, thank you very much for watching. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.